The ground is shaking.
What about if the ground opens up?
Shit. Whoa, whoa. No. Fuck. 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 Come under my jacket. Come under my jacket. Are you okay? Yeah.
You alright?
Yeah. Fuck. 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 Scheiße.
Fuck.
Fuck, ey.
Fuck. Fuck.
Get over the jacket.
No, wait.
Wait, maybe there's coming more.
Yeah. Should we go back into the tent?
Maybe in the kitchen tent.
Yeah,
Let's
maybe.
try it. Stay together.
Stay together.
And we try to find the kitchen tent. Oh no, there's no kitchen tent left. No, the kitchen tent is...
Let's go.
Kitchen tent is down.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Shaun Jeffery.
When you go to a place like Everest where you can be faced with extreme conditions and very difficult circumstances, one of the things that it does is exposes people. It exposes actually who you are and what your character is. And that's not always a pretty thing.
Although I consider myself a relatively rational human being, I have to confess that the closer I got to the summit of Mount Everest, the more I wanted to be there. And the fact that someone was dying in a tent a few meters away from us really was overcome by the sheer magnetism of that challenge to get to the summit.
Humans are driven to climb the highest mountains. Just as we are driven to go to the deepest depths of the ocean and explore the vastness of space, we can't help our curious nature. Historically, many cultures have harbored superstitions when it comes to mountains, which they often regarded as sacred due to their perceived proximity with heaven, such as Mount Olympus for the ancient Greeks, or even Mount Sinai for our modern Abrahamic religions. Moses coming down off a mountain with the word of God, that sort of thing. Mount Everest, on the other hand, serves not only as a testament to the majesty of nature's beauty, but as an alluring siren song calling to the heart of every adventurer. Despite the risks, thousands swarm to Nepal every year in an effort to conquer the tallest point on Earth. Many of them never leave. In fact, for some mountaineers, all that awaits them is a cold and lonely death. Francesco Petrarca, commonly known as Petrarch, was a scholar and poet of Renaissance Italy. His rediscovery of Cicero's letters is often credited with initiating the 14th century Renaissance. He is also, to a degree, the first recorded mountaineer. Now, obviously people have been climbing mountains since, well, there were people around to climb mountains. It's not as though Petrarch invented, putting one foot in front of the other and going up a mountain. But history always has to record the first person doing anything. On the 26th of April, the year 1336, Petrarch climbed to the summit of Mount Ventoux, 1,912 metres, or 6,273 feet, overlooking the Bay of Marseille. He claimed to be inspired by Philip V of Macedone's ascent of Mount Hamo, making him the first known alpinist. During the European Enlightenment, as a product of the new spirit of curiosity for the natural world, many mountain summits were surmounted for the first time. The beginning of mountaineering as a sport in the modern sense is generally dated to the ascent of the Wetterhorn in 1854 by English mountaineer Sir Alfred Wills, who made mountaineering fashionable in Britain. This inaugurated what became known as the Golden Age of alpinism, with the first mountaineering club, the Alpine Club, being founded in 1857. In the early years of this, quote, Golden Age, scientific pursuits were intertwined with the sport, such as by the physicist John Tyndall. In the later years, though, it shifted more to a competitive nature, as pure sportsmen came to dominate mountaineering overall. One of the most dramatic events was the spectacular first ascent of the Matterhorn in 1865 by a party led by English illustrator Edward Whymper, in which 4 of the party members fell to their deaths. This ascent is generally regarded as marking the end of the mountaineering Golden Age. By this point, the sport of mountaineering had largely reached its modern form, with an industry of professional guides, equipment, and fixed guidelines. Now, you can almost climb anything if you have enough money. The last and greatest mountain range was the Himalayas in Central Asia. They had initially been surveyed by the British Empire for military and strategic reasons, but by the 1950s, all the 8,000ers but 2 had been climbed. The last great peak was the highest of them all, Mount Everest. The British had made several attempts in the 1920s. The 1922 expedition reached 8,320 metres, 27,300 feet, before being aborted on the 3rd summit attempt after an avalanche killed 7 porters. The summit was finally reached on the 29th of May, 1953, by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay from the south side in Nepal. But controversy surrounds even this claim, as we'll hear soon. Mountaineering is considered to be one of the most dangerous activities in the world. Dangers in mountaineering are sometimes divided into 2 distinct categories. Objective hazards that exist without regard to the climber's presence, like rockfall, avalanches, and inclement weather. These things a climber has no control over. Then, there are subjective hazards that relate only to factors introduced by the climber, dodgy equipment, lack of preparation, etc. In all, mountaineers must concern themselves with a lot of dangers. Solar radiation, falling rocks, falling ice, snow avalanches, other climbers falling, falls from ice slopes, falls down snow slopes, falls into crevasses, and the dangers from altitude and weather, just to name a few. But these brave few still seek it out, quote, because it's there. Because it's there. With those 3 words to describe attempting the insurmountable, George Mallory not only cemented his own Everest fame, but an entire Western mentality for future generations. George Mallory was one of the most famous expert climbers of the early 20th century. He was part of the first 3 British expeditions to the summit and has the morbid distinction of being the oldest known corpse on Mount Everest, a corpse that was missing for over 75 years. During his 3rd attempt in 1924, Mallory and teammate Sandy Irvine made a push towards the top and were never seen again. Not only was their cause of death a mystery, but for over half a century, no one was certain if Mallory had actually reached the top or not. That would change history as we know it and make him the first known summit. An investigative expedition was launched in 1999 to find the duo and shed light on the last hours of one of the world's most famous adventurers. The team found Mallory's sun-bleached and mummified body on a low face on the north side of the mountain. Due to severe rope jerk injuries on his torso, the theory is that he was still tethered to Irvine when one of them fell off the mountain and pulled the other man with him. There was also a golf ball-sized puncture wound in his forehead that is thought to be the fatal blow. The team was led to believe that as Mallory slid down the rock face, he tried in desperation to slow his descent. He must have caught on a tilted slab of rock and bounced off, causing his head to smash straight back down into the rocks. The mystery still remains to this day if Mallory and Irvine actually summited. Teams are still searching for a photograph that Mallory was planning on leaving on the peak and a camera that Irvine had brought with them. Experts for Kodak have confirmed that if found and handled properly, the film could still be developed today. Irvine's body is still missing, and with him, the possible proof of the first ever Everest summit. Over 250 bodies remain on Everest, giving it claim to the title of the world's largest open-air graveyard. While most deaths occur due to avalanche, falls, or exposure to the harsh climate, the area known as the death zone holds a terribly high body count and comes with its own unique set of problems. The death zone is commonly known as the area above 8,000 meters, 26,000 feet. When the human body enters this altitude, it slowly starts to die. Then it becomes a race against the clock. Climbers have to make it from this mark to the peak and back again before their body fails them. Since oxygen at this level is only a third of what it is at sea level, climbers may find themselves sluggish, disorientated, and fatigued. The pressure makes weight feel 10 times heavier and causes extreme distress on organs. Because of these severe effects, climbers usually only have a window of 48 hours inside the death zone, and they are strongly urged to use supplemental oxygen at all times. If, or when, someone dies on Everest, it happens all the time. It's almost impossible to retrieve their body, especially in the death zone. Due to the unbearable weather conditions, severe lack of oxygen, pressure on dead weight, and the fact that many bodies are completely frozen onto the mountain face, most corpses are left exactly as they fall. Attempts are sometimes made to retrieve the bodies of a loved one, but those expeditions can cost upward of $25,000. And even then, they're extremely dangerous for the retrieval team. Overall, standard protocol is to simply let these figures, frozen in the final moments of death, become a permanent addition to the rocky terrain. It would make sense that the mountain's nickname is Everest. As a reporter from the BBC once stated, when Everest takes a life, it also keeps it. The number of bodies on Everest grows every year. Climbers taking the North Col route to Everest's elusive summit inevitably end up passing the mountain's most infamous landmark, green boots. While it sounds like a unique protrusion or hidden crevice on Everest's face, green boots is actually the frozen body of a fallen climber that earned his nickname because of the brightly coloured hiking boots that he was wearing when he died. While Green Boots' identity has always been hotly contested, he is widely believed to be Indian climber Suang Palyor. Palyor was part of a high-class Indian expedition to summit Everest that yielded only one survivor, Harbhajan Singh. Singh recalled that the expedition was marred by mistakes, and he had urged the other 3 men to abandon their quest due to the inclement weather when they were heading in. Singh suspects that his men succumbed to, quote, summit fever. Summit fever is a term used when climbers abandon thoughts of safety, and often their own morals, because they are close to reaching the summit and become blinded by the drive to cross the finish line over anything else. Don't be overconfident, Singh insisted. Listen to me. Please, come down. The sun is going to set. And while the men continued on, and eventually did end up reaching the summit, they encountered the terrible blizzard of 1996 on the trek back down. One of the most infamous events in the mountain's history. With zero visibility, in a fury of wind and driving snow, Palyor and his 2 comrades were lost to the brutality of the mountain. Over time, Palyor simply became known as Green Boots, and has become a permanent fixture on the North Col Passage. For the past 2 decades, climbers have used Green Boots as a macabre trail marker to gauge exactly how far they have left to go on their own race to the summit. As of 2014, Green Boots was finally dropped to a lower location over the side of the mountain, where he joined the bodies of other fallen climbers that have been cleared off of the main route. 20 years and 5 days after the death of Green Boots, and before the body was removed from the cave, a 34-year-old British man named David Sharp passed away in the same cave, only feet away from the macabre body marker that is Green Boots. The death of David Sharp nearly tore the entire climbing community apart. British mountaineer David Sharp made his 3rd trek to the top of Everest without the aid of oxygen, radios, Sherpas or teammates. His first 2 attempts were aborted due to perilous conditions, including ravaging frostbite that took several of his toes. He successfully summited Everest on the third try, and during his descent, he stopped to rest inside the cave, mere feet away from Green Boots himself. Being disorientated and suffering extreme exhaustion, Sharp drew his legs up to his chest and rested his head on his knees. He never got up. However, David Sharp didn't perish right away. Over 40 different climbers passed him on the mountain and noted that he was still alive but in distress. Outrage poured from around the world at the knowledge that Sharp was left moaning and murmuring to climbers who refused to abandon their own quest to the top in order to help him. Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to ever successfully summit Mount Everest, unless we find that missing camera from the Mallory expedition, spoke out against Mark Inglis and his team for allegedly seeing Sharp's distress and continuing on towards the top. Quote, "The whole attitude towards climbing Mount Everest has become rather horrifying," Hillary said. "A human life is far more important than just getting to the top of a mountain." The unwritten code among climbers is to abandon their quests in order to help others in peril. On Everest, many believe that the standard code does not apply due to the difficulties involved in climbing the tallest mountain on Earth. Many argue that it's every man for himself and that Everest has become a moral grey area. This modern mentality has pushed the climbing world into civil war, with David Sharp's death only further adding fuel to the proverbial flame. Inglis and his team attest that Sharp was completely frostbitten, incoherent and beyond saving when they found him. Claims have been made that many did try to help him, but seeing as he was too far gone, left him and continued their journey. Others stated that an immobile Sharp was actually mistaken for Green Boots and overlooked. Many cry out that Sharp was left on purpose, becoming just another victim of climber greed and summit fever. The sad truth of the matter is, it's too hard to save yourself on Everest, let alone rescue others. If you want proof, just take a stroll through Rainbow Valley. It's just along the northeast ridge route near Everest summit. If you look down just from there, you'll see a nice little pile of death. Rainbow Valley. While the name may suggest happiness and hope, Rainbow Valley is essentially a mass pit of dead bodies. This macabre scene got its name from all of the vibrantly coloured jackets and climbing gear that are still attached to the corpses strewn on that section of the mountain. Climbers along this route cannot help but notice this blatantly visible spectrum of colour as they take this particular passage. Throughout the years, climbers have been known to push bodies over the mountainside into Rainbow Valley, or cut the ropes of mummified corpses so that the way is less hazardous for those embarking on the trail. According to Nepalese law, Everest is sacred, and any bodies are to be removed immediately. However, the dilemma lies in the fact that since it's nearly impossible to retrieve bodies from the death zone, the bodies stay where they are. The Rainbow Valley will only continue to accrue more hues for its morbid colour palette. Let's go back for a moment now to the spring blizzard of 1996. The blizzard that left Green Boots in the cave, the blizzard which left devastation in its wake and took the lives of many a skilled climber. It was one of the most infamous disasters in the region, and many have heard tales of the tortured final hours of Rob Hall's expedition team. it inspired the book and then later the movie, Into Thin Air. Rob Hall, the expedition leader, stayed near the summit late into the day to try to help Douglas Hanson, a client, who was struggling with frostbite and altitude sickness. They made it down about 500 feet below the summit, but were trapped once night fell. Hanson soon died, and Hall felt himself succumbing to frostbite as well. Hall remained in contact with his base camp over the course of the entire next day, though the crew there couldn't send anyone to help the stranded climbers. They were, however, able to patch Hall through to his pregnant wife, Jan. Jan was a serious climber herself, and she was well aware of the risks that were associated with their pastime. Hall's last words to his pregnant wife were, "Hey look, don't worry about me." Another member of Hall's expedition, a Japanese woman by the name of Yasuko Namba, was a skilled mountaineer who was on Everest to complete the ultimate challenge of conquering the 7 summits. The Japanese climber had just reached the top and secured the title, as well as becoming the oldest woman at the time to have summited. As the 47-year-old was embarking upon her descent, the blizzard of 1996 struck the mountain. Yasuko, along with her fellow climber Beck Weathers and several guides, became trapped on the South Col. The whiteout conditions were so bad that no one in the party was sure where the camp was. Yasuko and Weathers became so weak that they were now being completely supported by their guides. Yasuko weighed barely 98 pounds, and her small body mass led her to be more susceptible to hypothermia and the harsh conditions at that altitude. Shortly after, help did come up from Base Camp 4, and they started evacuating the trapped climbers. Another guide, though, assumed that Yasuko Namba and Beck Weathers were dead. They left them behind as lost causes. A search party sent out the following day discovered Yasuko Namba and Beck Weathers in horrible conditions, and was certain that they wouldn't make it back to base camp. So now, after being abandoned twice over a span of 14 hours, Beck Weathers crawled into Base Camp 4 on his own the following day. This again called into question the mentality of every man for themselves. Basically, if you can't walk yourself out, we leave you. Sorry, not sorry. The rescuers had written off Weathers as too weak to make it back down the mountain the previous day when they found both him and Yasuko. However, Beck Weathers managed to drag himself down the mountain to safety the next day. He lost all his fingers, almost both of his hands, as well as his nose to frostbite. Yasuko Namba died from exhaustion and exposure. She was all alone, hundreds of meters back up the mountain. Rescuers were finally able to get to the climbers on Everest by May 14th, but the mountain had already claimed 8 lives. Among the dead were Rob Hall, Scott Fisher, Douglas Hanson, experienced climber Yasuko Namba, and guide Andy Harris, as well as 3 people from the expedition organised by the Indo-Tibetan Border Force, Suang Samanla, Dorje Murap, and Suang Palyo, or Green Boots. The most bewildering story of death on Mount Everest is that of British soldier, pilot, mystic, and mountaineer Maurice Wilson. In 1934, Wilson was a fierce proponent of using one's faith to solve the world's problems. He was inspired by George Mallory's summit expedition the previous decade. Wilson believed that by using prayer and his faith alone, he would succeed where Mallory had failed. Wilson's plan was to fly a plane to the upper slopes of Everest and then hike up to the summit. This plan was abandoned when authorities refused to allow him to fly near Everest. Despite being a poor pilot and having used only minor hikes around the foothills near his home for his mountaineering preparations, Wilson flew into India and approached from the Rombuk Glacier. Having no climbing equipment, he found his attempts at scaling the ice walls near impossible. His inexperience as a mountaineer showed when he stumbled upon some crampons, which are standard equipment for ice climbing. He found them at an abandoned camp and promptly left them behind. He was pretty much climbing Everest in some gentleman's boots. Constantly losing his bearings and having to retrace his steps in horrid weather, Wilson finally retreated back to the Rombuk monastery with a twisted ankle, snowblind, and suffering from exhaustion. After several more attempts, which were all marred by bad weather, no climbing equipment, and his just straight up lack of experience within a mountain environment, Sherpas Tawand and Rinzin urged him to return to camp and give up. When Wilson did not return from his last attempt, they left the mountain and reported his death. Maurice Wilson was found in 1935, covered in snow, surrounded by pieces of his wind-blown tent. Many of the details of Wilson's expedition come from his diary that was found in a rucksack near his corpse. In 2001, French snowboarder Marco Siffredi became the first person to successfully snowboard down Mount Everest using the North Col Passage. Siffredi, who had come from a long line of mountaineers, was disappointed that he was unable to complete his actual goal of boarding down Hornbeam Colleur, which he considered to be the true face of Mount Everest. Siffredi returned in 2002 at a time of year when the Hornbeam would have amassed more snow in an attempt to ride down the steepest slope on all of Everest. He reached the summit in a grueling 12 hours with the aid of his Sherpa friend, Furba Tashi. Upon reaching the top, Furba was excited, but Siffredi did not share his friend's outlook. Siffredi supposedly responded, quote, tired, too much snow, too much climbing. Being so late in the day with clouds beginning to fill in, the Sherpas urged Siffredi not to make the descent, but he refused to pass up a chance to conquer the holy grail of snowboarding. That was the last time that Marco Siffredi was seen alive. As the Sherpas were packing up Camp 3, they noticed a figure rise and then slide down the mountain along the North Col. This was strange because Siffredi would have been nowhere near the North Col Passage and he was the only climber on Everest at that time of year. When the Sherpas investigated the area where they had seen the figure, there were no snowboarding tracks anywhere. People really do seem to just disappear into thin air on the slopes of Everest. For example, even if you're a married couple, tackling the adventure together, take your eyes off your partner for just a second, and poof, they're gone. Frances Arsentiev and her husband Sergei were avid climbers who sought to conquer Everest in 1998. Frances had a goal to become the first American woman to summit Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen. Everyone's just always got to push it that one bar higher. After 2 aborted attempts, she finally succeeded, but was never able to celebrate her achievement. Due to their lack of supplemental oxygen, the couple moved slowly, and they were not able to summit until very late in the day on the 22nd of May. This then forced them to spend another night in the death zone. Somehow, the couple became separated during this final evening, and Sergei made his way down to Base Camp 4, assuming that his wife had done the same. Upon discovering her absence, when he did finally return to camp, Sergei raced back up to the top with oxygen and medicine in hopes of rescuing his wife. While accounts vary, on the 23rd of May, an Uzbek mountaineering team found Frances half alive and unable to move on her own. They carried her down as far as they could until their own oxygen ran out and they had to leave Frances and descend to camp. Along the way, they passed Sergei on his way up to her. He was never seen alive again. And Frances, she became known as Sleeping Beauty. It was Sleeping Beauty's haunting final hour that cemented her legend. On the 24th of May, climbers Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd saw a body raggedly jerking in the shadows of the first step, one of 3 steps on the northeast ridge. Frances was severely oxygen deprived, frostbitten, and still attached to her climbing line. She kept murmuring, quote, "Don't leave me here. Don't leave me here to die." The team abandoned their attempt to summit and spent over an hour trying to save her. Between the perilous location, Frances slipping in and out of consciousness, and their own oxygen running out, the team made the painful decision to leave her and return to camp. Don't leave me here. Don't leave me here to die. For 9 years, climbers scaled around the frozen Sleeping Beauty, who became a part of Everest's landscape. In 2007, Woodall returned to the mountain and dropped Frances, Sleeping Beauty, to a lower face where she can slumber for eternity, no longer a summit marker for other climbers. So why then are the Himalayas so tall and dangerous and cold and foreboding? It's because the Indian subcontinent is slamming and subducting under the Asian continent. Good old tectonic plate action. That means earthquakes. And sometimes fucking big ones. During the afternoon of the 25th of April, 2015, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck Nepal and the surrounding areas. Shaking from the quake triggered avalanches into the base camp on Mount Everest. At least 22 people were killed, surpassing an avalanche that occurred only the previous year as the deadliest disaster on the mountain. The 7.8 magnitude quake not only levelled ancient buildings in Kathmandu, but caused a monstrous amount of devastation on Mount Everest. Among the Everest dead was Dan Fredenberg, the head of privacy for Google X. Fredenberg had started Google Adventure Team, which documented remote mountains, ocean floors and reefs in the same manner that Google Maps details cities and towns. A mountain enthusiast, Fredenberg had scaled 4 of the 7 summits of the world before attempting Everest. The 7 Summits is a mountaineering challenge to successfully climb the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents of the world. While Google refused to confirm details, allegedly Fredenberg and 3 other employees were on this expedition to Everest in order to enable a street view trek to base camp, as well as to bring a street view camera to the summit. During the avalanche, Dan suffered major head trauma and died from his injuries. The other 3 Google employees sustained injuries but were able to be evacuated. Google committed $1 million to relief efforts and tried to supply updated satellite images to assist in the recovery missions. No one knows exactly how many bodies remain on Mount Everest today, but there are certainly more than 250. Climbers and Sherpas lie tucked into crevasses, buried under avalanche snow and exposed on catchment basin slopes, their limbs sun-bleached and distorted. To take a few quotes from George Mallory, "When I say our sport is a hazardous one, I do not mean that when we climb mountains there is a large chance that we shall be killed, but that we are surrounded by dangers which will kill us if we let them. Reaching the highest point on Earth once served as a symbol of man's desire to conquer the universe. Why climb the highest mountain? Because it's there. For years to come, perhaps forever, Everest will no doubt continue to do what it has for decades. Capture the imagination, provide the backdrop for dreams and personal triumphs, and take a few lives in the process. Green Boots may at last be at rest, removed from his cold, dark cave high on the mountain. But there is no guarantee that that cave will remain empty for long.
Land of bear and land of eagle, land that gave us birth and blessing, land that called us ever homewards. We will go home across the mountain. We will go home, we will go home, we will go home across the mountain. We will go home, we will go home, we will go home across the mountain. Land of freedom, land of heroes, land that gave us hope and memories. Hear our singing, hear our longing. We will go home across the mountain. We will go home, we will go home, we will go home across the mountains. We will go home, we will go home, we will go home across the mountains. have gone home across the mountains.